This is going to be the first video going over our next project with hopefully we'll be doing this right after winter break. So I'm just starting to record the videos now. We're all going to be making this step stool as kind of our first project. Hopefully this takes us about I'm thinking at most 2 weeks, but hopefully less than that for a lot of you. This is all made out of a 2.5 foot section of a 2x8 construction board. And so it's just a kind of nice, easy project to kind of learn about some of the basics of how to go about looking at a project. So when we're looking at this page here, we've got an assembly view or a final product view of what this is going to look like when it's all assembled. And you can see it's got a top, it's got two like leg pieces, and it's got this stretcher that goes through the middle that kind of holds everything together. When you open these up, each page is going to show you a different piece. So on this page, you're going to see this is the top of our stool. It gives us overall dimensions. So this stool is going to be 12 inches long, 7 inches wide. So when we go to mill our material, we're going to have to mill a piece that is 12 inches long, 7 inches wide. You can see here 1 inch thick. Well, we know we're starting with a 2x8. So a 2x8 is 1.5 inches thick. So we can mill it down to 1 inch. It's also 7.25 to 7.5 inches wide. So we'll be able to get that out of it. And we'll need a 12-inch long piece of that. We'll talk about when we start milling our stock down, we're going to go with a piece that's a little bit bigger than 12 inches so that we can cut it down to final dimension at the end. And you can also see it's got some information here about chamfers, which we'll add on at the router table or with a handheld router at the end just to kind of make it look a little nicer. On our next page here, we've got the drawings for the legs. I realized I'm missing one dimension. They are 6 inches tall in total. You can see 7 inches wide. Again, we're getting this out of a 2x8, so that's good. We're going to mill our stock down to 0.75 or 3/4 of an inch thick. And it's got some information here for how to lay this out. So we're going to actually have a little taper going from there to there, about 1 inch in on each side at the top. And then we've got a mortise here to accept a tenon that goes through our stretcher. So 1.5 inches tall, 1/2 inch wide. We'll make that with the dado stack at the table saw. So you can see here we're going to be doing some work on the bandsaw to cut a circle and to cut these tapers. We'll be milling our stock down. We'll be using a dado stack to cut our mortise. And then our last piece here is our stretcher that has our tenon on it. So you can see it's got an overall width of 11.5 inches. We'll just make this out of a 2x4 overall here. But again, I guess it doesn't actually say overall dimensions, but the overall dimension is going to be 3/4. So we'll mill a board down to 3/4, 2.5 inches wide, 11.5 inches long. Just like we've been talking about, before winter break, every single piece of a project always starts off with joint plane, joint rip, and then cross cut to length. From there, we're going to machine in some tenons. These are really big tenons, a 1/2 inch thick. So we're really just shaving off a tiny little bit on each side with the dado stack, and then a much bigger piece at the bottom. And as you can see, we're going to add some chamfers to the end of our tenon just to make it look nice. You'll see that on the finished product there. We'll probably end up doing that by hand with either a chisel or sandpaper or a file or a block plane, because adding those chamfers by a machine like a router is rather difficult in this case. So that's the process of this. The next section of this video is going to be talking about making probably the top of our stool and the milling process and all of that that's going to go into that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about here is just kind of laying out where we're going to get each of our individual pieces on this. One of the big things I want you to think about is if there's any knots in your board, if there's a way that we can work around those and either cut those out and not use that piece, or put it someplace that's not going to be as big of a deal. We wouldn't want to try to cut a dado or a tenon out of a big knot like that. So I know that my top piece is going to be 12 inches long. I want to try to find a piece that is a little bit longer than 12 inches, just like when we were doing anything else. I'm going to start by cutting a board a little bit longer than I need. So 12 inches here puts that right in the middle of the knot. If I wanted to, I could go for a more rustic look and try to include that knot in my board somehow. Or I could just say, okay, I'm gonna get my 12 inches from this side, and then maybe I'll try to get that like right in the middle where it's not gonna be in the middle of a tenon, or try to get that where the arch cuts out, something like that. Ideally, the way I have this planned out is your 2.5 foot board is going to give you about an extra 2 inches on each part. So when I need a 12-inch part, I might try to go up to about 14 or 13.5, or at least 13 for my rough cut, just so that I have that little bit extra to work with. You're going to end up having about 6 inches of scrap on this board no matter what, so we might as well make our lives easier. So this is just a rough cut. This piece is bigger than my 12 inches, so I'm going to go ahead and rough cut this board on the miter saw, and then we'll go into our joint plane, joint grip process. So we all know how to use the miter saw by now. I'm just lining up on my cut here, make sure I'm holding it securely. You will need the sliding function for a 2x8, so here we go. This is my piece for the top of my spool. The next step is going to be jointing. Okay, so now we're over here at the jointer. This is a good time to just kind of remind you of some good practices on the jointer. Very likely your board is going to rock one direction. If that's the case, go ahead and flip it over. We want to try to run it through the jointer on the side that it's not going to rock on. This is also a really good time to just take a pencil. My pencil would work here. Take a pencil and just scribble on the bottom of your board so that we can see once that pencil is all gone, we know we've got a flat board. I also just need to make sure this fence is pushed far enough back that I'm going to be able to get the whole piece of my board. So I'm going to go ahead and slide it back just a little bit further here, and then I'll go ahead and run this through the jointer. I might cut this part out because it's loud. Okay, so I did 2 passes over my jointer to get that all smoothed off. At this point, I'm also going to go ahead and do my edge joint. Rather than doing joint plane, joint rip, I'm going to go ahead and joint the face, joint the edge, then we'll plane, and then we'll rip. Doesn't really matter which way we do it, but I am going to take a second here and double check my fence for square. And just double check, yep, that looks pretty square. I'll leave that there for you. And now I'm going to run my jointed face up against the fence so I can joint my edge. So now what I've got is a flat jointed face and a flat jointed edge. If you want, one thing you can do is just kind of put a little arrow pointing on here. You say this is my edge and this is my nice jointed face. And then we'll go over to the planer and we're shooting for 1 inch. So now we're over here at the planer. I'm going to go ahead and measure my board. I'm going to try to find the thickest spot. Right now the thickest spot on my board is 1.44. So I'm going to set my planer to 1.4. There's the 4, there's the 4. Let that go. And I'm going to go ahead and plane my board down to 1 inch. This is where you have a little bit of an option here. If I wanted to stop a little bit bigger, I could maybe go 1.1 or 1.05, and that would leave me enough room to then go to my belt sander and actually sand it smooth. It might give you a little bit better surface finish if you're wanting to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and start planing. I'm definitely going to be cutting this out, cutting the middle out. You'll probably see my first pass and then the last pass. Okay, so you can see I actually stopped here at 1.05. That's just going to give me a little bit of room if I want to run it through the belt sander. I'm not going to go ahead and show that right now, but that's what we're doing there. Our last step with this piece is going to be our rip and then our cross cut. Okay, so over here at the table saw, I want to bring my piece down to its final 7 inches in width. So I will set my fence maybe just a hair bigger than 7, just so that I have some room to do some final sanding. I'm going to place my board in here, and we will go ahead and run it through the table saw. Make sure you've got your push stick handy, and then I forgot to turn on the saw ahead of time. There we go. So we just took off a tiny little amount there. All that's doing is getting this down to a consistent 7 inches. Okay, and then our last milling operation here is going to be to bring it down to 12 inches in length. So in this case, what I'm going to do here is just trimming a little bit off of this end, and then I will cut my other end to be exactly 12. So this end I'm just going for cutting off maybe 1/8 of an inch total, just the blade width, so I get a nice clean edge. That gives me a nice clean edge on that. Now I can set my stop to be 12 inches. There, 12 inches. And I'm just running that nice clean edge that I just cut on the table saw right up against my new stop here. And this will be my cut to my final length. Make sure we let that blade come to a complete stop and grab our So now I'm at my final dimension. Okay, and then our final operation here on the top of our board is at the router table. We're gonna put a chamfer, kind of a bigger chamfer on the top and then a smaller chamfer on the bottom. The specific size here is up to you, it's just decorative. So I have it set where I want it for the top, and then I'll lower it down a little bit for the bottom. So I've got my chamfer on the top, and I'm just gonna lower this bit down a little bit once it stops here. So I'll unlock it, and I'll lower it down, and I'm just looking for just a little bit of a chamfer on the bottom. Mostly what this is doing is just making it so it doesn't have a sharp edge. So here we go. And you can see I've just got a tiny little chamfer on my bottom, ready to go. This would be a time to now do some finish sanding over at our sanding tables here, and then if we wanted to stain it, this would be a good time to stain it.